Hey everybody, in this wizard build video for the game of Frostgrave, I'll be creating a Sigilist focused on the spells Power Word, Blinding Light, and Right Scroll. Hey everybody, I'm Alan, with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, tabletop gaming with bricks and blocks and helping to build your gameplay foundation. In this video, I'll start by showing you my Sigilist spell list, discuss the main spells that form their strategy, discuss how their other spells fit in, recommend some soldiers to hire for this wizard, and give my thoughts about using this build in a game. So let's get to the bricks and blocks of building this Sigilist for Frostgrave. For their starting spells, from their primary school, I've selected Explosive Ruin, Power Word, and Right Scroll. From their aligned schools, I've selected Enchant Weapon, Transpose, and Blinding Light. And from their neutral schools, I've selected Fast Act and Animal Companion. The main strategy for this Sigilist focuses around the Power Word spell. And even though this spell is a Sigilist spell, it still has a high casting number of 14. But I'll be discussing later in the video how to get around that. On the first turn, the spellcaster's goal should be to use Power Word to strengthen Blinding Light spells, which normally have an adjusted casting number of 10 for Sigilists. Once Power Word is in effect and providing its +3 bonus, and remember you can't have 2 Power Words in effect for the same spell at any given time, the strategy focuses on spamming Blinding Light. The wizard will succeed on any roll of 7 or more, with the apprentice succeeding on a 9 or higher. And those low successful rolls will be bumped up to 14s due to the casting roll minimum rule, which makes it fairly reliable to cast and difficult for soldiers to resist. Also, since Power Word's effect adds 3 to the casting roll, if you do roll high, you can actually end up with a result over 20, which is more than you can normally empower a spell, and many targets would need to roll a natural 20 to resist that. As far as who should be targeted with Blinding Light, it should usually be cast on soldiers, not on spellcasters. Wizards have a high starting will to start with, and both they and apprentices can empower their will rolls, which makes the spell fairly unreliable when cast on them, unless they're low on health, at which point it can work great on them. The goal should always be to target a figure that hasn't activated yet in the turn. Some resistance rolls are based on when the target activates, but for this spell, the roll is immediate and at the end of each turn. So if they've already activated, they'd get 2 attempts to resist it before it affects anything about how they choose to use their actions. So it's usually best on something that'll be activating during the soldier phase. And it's great on Knights and Templars, reducing their fight by 4, and on ranged soldiers so they can't shoot at you. But it's less reliable on barbarians with their +3 will. Once a couple of your enemies are blinded, the next step is to make use of the Enchant Weapon spell. This spell casts on a 10 for Sigilists, and it's the only spell in the core book that can raise a figure's shoot stat. And this should ideally be cast on a figure carrying a crossbow. Since the shot is more likely to hit a blinded target, the +2 damage is more likely to be relevant. And since the blind target can't run away as easily if you miss, standing your ground while reloading is less of an issue. Enchanting the two-handed weapon of a barbarian is also a good idea, as they can run to the blinded target quickly, and their lack of defense is less of an issue when battling enemies with +0 fight. And since enchanting a melee weapon allows a figure to inflict magic damage, the spell can be helpful if monsters unaffected by normal weapons show up on the battlefield. The next part of the Sigilist strategy involves their out-of-game spells. Since Right Scroll casts on a 12, it's easier for the spellcasters to create scrolls of Power Word after a game than it is to actually cast Power Word during the game. Equipping the wizard with one of these scrolls means that if they fail to cast the spell, they can use their item to succeed and guarantee that Power Word is in effect the whole game. Their other out-of-game spell is Animal Companion, which will cast on a 14. Since the team should have a few ranged soldiers filling their specialist slots, adding a couple bears or snow leopards, both of which are standard soldiers, will give you more close combat options. For their other spells, Fast Act is there as a situational option. Since the team will likely have ranged soldiers spread around the battlefield, being able to activate one outside of the soldier phase when their opponent isn't expecting it can be nice in a pinch. And its casting number of 12 for a Sigilist is acceptable for these occasional uses. Explosive Rune casts on just a 10, being a Sigilist spell. The runes created by this can do some decent damage with their +5 magic attacks, but opposing figures can easily move around them unless the runes are placed right at an adversary's feet, in which case any movement they make will trigger it to explode. But the spell has a limited range of just 4 inches. So the spell is primarily here to defend against uncontrolled creatures that happen to pop up behind your battle lines. And since monsters typically move in straight, predictable paths, it's easy to place the runes like landmines that the creatures will just charge right into. Their last spell is Transpose. This aligned spell has a casting number of 14. It's here as more of a last resort when the rest of their strategy is failing and someone needs to get bailed out of the battle. However, this can also be a good second option strategy. If an opponent has easy access to Dispel or Spell Eater, or has high-willed soldiers, the Blinding Light strategy can crumble. And if an opponent also likes to use Blinding Light, targeting that spell with Power Word will also help them with their castings. So powering up Transpose instead in those cases allows you to focus more on moving your figures around, something that's really useful for getting powered up crossbowmen and barbarians right where you want them to be. Although barbarians and crossbowmen work well with this team's strategy, starting funds can be a little tight after hiring an apprentice. I'd recommend beginning a campaign by hiring 2 crossbowmen and then 3 infantrymen, who will temporarily fill the barbarian's role of offense before defense. Then bringing along 1 thief for hauling treasure and 2 thugs to aid in combat. As far as how to progress the warband, a suggestion would be to eventually hire 2 barbarians, ditch the thugs for bears or snow leopards you can find with Animal Companion, and possibly replace one of the crossbowmen with a marksman, a soldier that has a few more combat options. With leveling up the wizard, while the team's main strategy focuses on Power Word, don't level up that spell at all. Instead, focus on the Right Scroll spell. A few levels should be pumped into this early on to help you create a few Power Word scrolls. And then later in the campaign, the spell works well to just create other scrolls you might want to make. The next step is to lower the casting numbers for Blinding Light, Enchant Weapon, and eventually Transpose. The rest of their spells are so situational that I wouldn't bother improving them unless I got to a very high level with this Sigilist. For their stats, since they hopefully won't see much combat, improving their health first will give them more options with empowering their spells as needed. This isn't the best Sigilist build. It doesn't even include the Push Spell, which is amazingly powerful. But if you've never made use of the Power Word spell, this build showcases what it can do and makes for a fun wizard to play. And Blinding Light is quite effective at neutralizing opponents, so the build should work fairly well in a battle in the frozen city of Frostgrave. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about this Sigilist build, and if you've ever made good use of the Power Word spell. I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming. Thank you for watching and play well.